We're going to have a look at adding or subtracting a negative. We're going to use a scenario to help us make sense of this. And in this scenario, what you've got to do is imagine that that big white thing is a pot, and those red circles are hot disks, and the blue circles are cold disks. Now, if we go ahead and pop 2 hot disks into my pot, the temperature in my pot is now going to be +2. If instead I go ahead and put in 3 cold disks into my pot, the temperature in the pot is going to be -3. And now, if I go and throw in a hot disk into that pot, can you see that what's going to happen is the cold disk and the hot disk are really going to cancel each other out and come to a neutral temperature. In other words, the -1 and adding 1 are going to get you to a 0. And so what we have here then in this pot is a temperature of -2, because the hot disk and the cold disk, the +1 and the -1, kind of neutralize each other to 0. Okay, now that we've got that idea, what we can look at here is this pot and see that this pot has currently a temperature of 0, because you've got all those pairs of -1 and +1, a hot and a cold, which cancel each other out to 0. So, if we're in this situation and we add in 1 more hot disk, let's think about it. If you add in 1 hot disk, is our temperature going to go up or down? Hopefully you immediately can see that adding in something hot is going to make the temperature go up. And our temperature now in this pot is going up from 0 to 1. And so what we can see here is that if we're adding in a positive, adding in something hot, it's just the same as going up. Okay, back to our 0 situation. Now in this case, if we add in a cold disk, add in a negative, will our temperature go up or down? Well, if we throw in a cold disk, obviously the temperature is going to go down. So from 0, we're going to be going down to -1. So what we see is adding in a negative, adding in a cold disk is going to be the same as subtracting, going down. All right, now in this situation, we're back at 0. And what we're going to do in this case is we're going to take out one of those positives, one of those hot disks. So we're going to take out a hot disk, subtract a positive. Now, if we take out something hot from our pot, will the temperature in the pot go up or down? Well, if you think about it, if you've removed some heat, obviously the temperature is going to go down. So from 0, we will go down to -1. And so what we have is that subtracting a positive will just be the same as subtracting, going down. Now this is the one that gets really interesting. We're at 0, and this time I want us to take out a cold disk, subtract a negative. So if we subtract a negative, take out a cold disk. If we take some cold out of the pot, what is going to happen to the temperature in the pot? If we take some cold out, obviously the temperature is going to go up, and so we will end up at 1. And so what we see is subtracting a negative, taking out some of the cold, is the same as adding. Okay, so how does that help us with calculations? Let's have a look at this sort of scenario here. Hopefully you can immediately see you've got a whole lot of, well, you've got 3 0 pairs, but then you've also got 3 -1s. And so what you've got in this pot at the moment is a -3. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about what's going to happen if we take away -2. So if we think about it in our scenario, we're going to be taking away, subtracting a negative, so we're going to be taking out some of the cold. If we're taking out some of the cold, will our temperature go up or down? Taking out cold, our temperature must go up. And so what we see is taking away a negative is the same as going up. It's the same as adding, and we know how to do that. We'll get our answer of -1, which you can see in the picture anyway. Similarly, here we start again at -3, and in this case, we want to take away +2. So what we're going to be doing is subtracting a positive. We're taking out 2 of those hot disks. We're taking out some heat. If we're taking out some heat, do we expect the temperature to go up or down? Taking out heat, obviously the temperature is going to go down. So what we're doing is we're simply going down, subtracting, and so what we get is the answer of -5. So just quickly to summarize what we've done, if we are adding a positive, we are adding some heat, we're going to go up. It's just the same as adding. If we are adding a negative, we are adding in some cold, so we're going to go down. So it's just the same as subtracting. If we are subtracting a positive, we are taking out some heat, so of course we're going to go down. And so it's the same as subtracting. And if we are subtracting a negative, we are taking out some of the cold. So if we're taking out some of the cold, we're going to go up. So it's the same as adding. Okay, a quick recap really of what we looked at previously. Here, if we are adding, in the first case, a positive, remember, our idea from last time is we're adding in something hot. Obviously, we're just going to carry on going up, and so that is just going to be the same as plain old adding, and so we'll get our answer nice and easily. In the next case, we are adding in a negative, so we're adding in something cold. In other words, we're going to end up going down in our temperature, and so what we will have is the same as just subtracting because we're going down, and so we'll get our answer like that. Now in the next case, what we're doing here is we're subtracting a positive. In other words, we're taking away some of the heat. If we're taking away some of the heat, we're obviously going to be going down in temperature. So again, this is just subtraction. And then the last case scenario where we are taking away a negative, we are taking away some of the cold. So if we're taking away some of the cold, our temperature is going to go up. It's the same as adding. And so we'll get our answer there. Let's look at how we might deal with a scenario like this one, where we are asked to fill in the gap. So what we've got is 4 subtract something has to get us to 7. Now, 7 is bigger than 4. So to get from 4 to 7, we have to go up. But what we have here is subtraction. And subtraction generally means we go down. So the only way we're going to get it to be going up is if what we subtract is in fact negative. So we subtract a negative because we know subtracting a negative, taking away some of the cold, is the same as making it go up. In other words, adding. And then we know it has to be 3 steps. Let's put together everything now that we've been working on with adding and subtracting, including negative numbers. So, if you are asked to do a calculation like this, your very first step needs to be the following. you need to deal with the brackets. So here we are subtracting a negative, taking away some cold, so obviously we're going to be going up. It's the same as adding. Taking away a negative is the same as adding. Once we've dealt with the brackets, the next step that I always recommend is the following. Decide if your answer is going to be positive or negative. This just helps me not go wrong. So if I have a look here and I think about it, I'm at negative 23 and I'm going to be coming up by 16 steps. Am I going to go beyond the 0? Well, no, I'm not. So I know that my answer is going to be negative. So I make a note for myself of that. And we've done this kind of one plenty of times. We know that this is going to be the same as 16 subtract 23. It's a difference. It's a difference where the answer is negative. What's the difference between 23 and 16? Well, 7 is the answer. So our total answer here is negative 7. Okay, what about one like this? So our step 1 is always to deal with the brackets. So here we are adding a negative, adding in some cold. Things are going to go down. So it is the same as subtracting. And then we go on to step 2. And that's just quickly to decide for ourselves whether the answer will be positive or negative. Well, here you're at negative 11 and you're going even further down. You're obviously still going to end up being negative, so we know our answer needs to be negative. And now what we know is we're in that situation where we're negative going down. It's just the same as positive going up, but negative, right? So it's the same as 11 plus 12, which is 23, but it is negative. Let's look at multiplying and dividing with integers. If we go back to primary school, 4 multiplied by 3 just means 4 lots of 3. And that is going to be 12. Now, 4 multiplied by negative 3, well, that's just going to mean 4 lots of negative 3. And that we know is just negative 3, subtract 3, subtract 3, subtract 3. In other words, you're at negative 3 and you keep on going further and further down. You're going to end up at negative 12. If we do negative 4 subtract 3, well, we can always just swap around the order in which we do multiplication. So that's the same as 3 multiplied by negative 4. So that's 3 lots of negative 4, which is going to be negative 4 subtract 4, which is negative 12. The one that's going to cause us a little bit of problems is negative 4 multiplied by negative 3. Because all the other ones we could talk about as 4 lots of negative 3 or 3 lots of negative 4. Whereas now it's a bit more abstract with negative 4 multiplied by negative 3. So what we're going to see is what makes most sense. And that's what we're going to use to get the answer. So basically what we're going to see here is that we had negative 4 multiplied by 3 being negative 12. So negative 4 multiplied by negative 3, it wouldn't be comfortable to call that negative 12 because we've changed something. We've changed the 3 to negative 3. So what makes most sense would be to call it 12. Now I know that's not a very satisfactory explanation, and at a later point in life we can go into a much more satisfactory explanation. But hopefully for now it's enough to give you some sense of why we'd want negative 4 multiplied by negative 3 to be 12 rather than negative 12. Okay, but let's summarize what we have established there. That if we've got a positive multiplied by a positive, our answer is positive. And if we've got a negative multiplied by a negative, our answer is positive as well. But if we have a positive multiplied by a negative, or a negative multiplied by a positive, the answer will be negative. And because multiplication and division are closely related, the same story is going to hold true for division. So let's look at some examples. Why don't you pause the video and see if you can try these? Okay, so 3 multiplied by -5. That's going to be a positive multiplied by a negative. That answer has to be negative. The next one, remember when we just write 2 brackets next to each other? We mean multiplication. So it's -4 multiplied by -6. A negative multiplied by a negative has to be positive, and 4 multiplied by 6 is 24. And then in the last one, we've got a positive divided by a negative, so that's going to give me a negative, and 32 divided by 8 is 4. A suggestion I have to make sure that you never go wrong when you're doing calculations with negatives is just to make sure that you ask yourself quickly before you start whether you're adding or subtracting, or whether you're multiplying or dividing. Let me show you what I mean. Have a look at these 2 questions here. They look similar, but they're in fact asking quite different things. In the first one, and this is what I'm suggesting we always actually ask ourselves, is just check whether we are in the multiplication division world or whether we're in the addition subtraction world before you start doing anything else. So let's have a look at this first one over here. This just says -5 subtract 3. It is very carefully and very clearly in the addition subtraction world. We're just doing a subtraction here. Whereas this one here, you know that if you've just got these 2 brackets written next to each other and we've left out any sign in between, we're talking about multiplication. And so this one here is in that multiplication division world. And why is that important? Well, it's because they're very different rules for how you deal with negative numbers, depending on which of those worlds you're in. So if we go with the first one, we're at -5, and we go 3 more steps further down, so obviously we're going to end up at -8. Whereas in the second one, we're in the multiplication world, and in that world, we've got those rules. Negative times negative is positive. Positive times positive is positive, and a negative times positive or a positive times negative is negative. So in this case, we've got negative times negative, it's positive. 5 times 3, it's 15. So we've got positive 15 as our answer. Okay, try this one for yourself. First decide if you're in the multiplication division world or the addition subtraction world, and then do the calculation. Pause the video and try it now. Okay, so hopefully in this one, what you saw is that here you are in the subtraction world. You're saying 2 subtract -3. But here you've got nothing between the 2 and the bracket. In other words, this is a multiplication. So then this one will become, if we are subtracting a negative, taking away some cold, it's the same as adding. So this is going to be the same as 2 plus 3, which is 5. In contrast, here we're in the multiplication world, and so we're going to use our rule. A positive multiplied by a negative gives me a negative, so the answer is going to be negative, and 2 times 3 is 6. A reminder that we also need to obey our conventions around the order of operations when we're dealing with negative numbers. So we use the kind of word BEDMAS to help us remember, and that we deal with stuff in the brackets first, then we deal with exponents, and then we deal with division and multiplication. They're at the same level, and we deal with addition and subtraction at the very last level. So if we're faced with having to do a calculation like this, the first thing we're going to do is to do that multiplication there, 4 multiplied by -3. And so what we're going to get is we're going to get 5 plus 4 multiplied by -3 is -12. And then here we're adding in a negative, so that's just the same as subtracting. And 5 subtract 12 is going to be -7. Okay, let's deal with this one. So we do have some brackets with an operation inside them here. So that's the very first step we need to do. 2 subtract 3 is equal to -1. Now the next step that I need to do is to look and see if there are any exponents to deal with. And I do have exponents here. What's -5 squared? Well, it's -5 multiplied by -5. A negative times a negative is a positive, and 5 times 5 is 25. So this is 25. Now what's my next step? I look to see if I've got any division or multiplication, and I do have some division and multiplication. That's over here. So this is the multiplication. 25 multiplied by -2, that's going to give me -50. Okay, and so what do I have? I'm adding a negative, so it's just subtracting. And now all I have is addition and subtraction, so I simply work from left to right. So -1 subtract 50, that's -1 going even further down, so it's going to be -51, but then coming back up 4 steps, so it's going to be -47.